I'm coming to you tonight from my home office on the ancestral lands of the Southern Pomo here in Forestville, California. I celebrate the active work of the Southern Pomo descendants who are working hard to preserve and nourish their indigenous culture and identity. Mil gracias. On behalf of Los Cien, Sonoma County, I welcome all of you to tonight's conversation. Our conversation, Standing Up for Racial Equity and with Los Cien, will focus on race and equity disparities and how our community allies can stand up with Los Cien and expand their role in achieving substantive change for everyone who calls Sonoma County home. We are honored to have a distinguished panel of speakers joining us at this roundtable conversation tonight. Our moderator will be Nico Kimzin, Executive Director of Kimzin Creative Arts and Equity Consulting Group. He is our very own bootleg Mario Lopez, and he's gonna introduce all the rest of the panel in just a couple of minutes. First, we want to invite you to join us in the conversation in the Zoom chat and also in the comment section on Facebook Live. We have members of the Los Cien Board and Program Committee monitoring the chat and monitoring the comments, and they will be feeding us your questions and comments. Also, before we begin, huge thank you, mil gracias to Betsy Chavez. She's our translator tonight. She's our translation goddess. Thank you so much. Language justice is real, and no one should ever feel left out of a Los Cien conversation under any circumstances. Betsy makes it possible for our friends who are Spanish speaking to join this conversation, be active, and lift your voices. To participate by Spanish language translation, there's an interpretation button in the bottom of the screen. Just tap that and Betsy is there for you. One more big shout out tonight, one more big set of thank yous. Our work is made possible at Los Cien through the support of our sponsors and partners. We want to thank the Community Foundation Sonoma County, the Luther Burbank Center for the Arts, Petaluma Health Center, Redwood Credit Union, Sonoma Media Investments, Kaiser Permanente, the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria, United Way of the Wine Country, River Rock Casino, Barbara Grasecki and Tony Crabb, the City of Santa Rosa, Leap Solutions, the City of Cloverdale, Sonoma Raceway, Puma Springs Vineyard, and Exchange Bank. To move us into the program, I want to share a quote from Deborah Gorman, President and CEO of the Green Lining Institute. Equity is a verb, and true equity must move beyond words and lofty aspirations. It must be reflected in the day-to-day practices of both individuals and institutions, and tangible results for our communities. This work isn't quick or simple, but it is good work, critical work, and it is revolutionary work. The late Congressman John Lewis from the Atlanta area would call this good trouble. This work is not possible without all of you. In the fall of 2021, just a few months ago, after 12 years of producing more than 100 formal community conversations that were meant to build awareness and to build bridges among everybody who participated in them, Los Cien's program committee and board of directors felt compelled to create the following statement. Los Cien Sonoma County exists to hold critical conversations on issues that concern the Latinx community and to uplift and illuminate Latinx experiences. Our intention is to build bridges toward solutions and changes that empower every community member. We respect all perspectives, and we expect respect and professionalism in return. We are committed to holding these difficult conversations. Racism has a disparate effect on Asian, Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. It is corroding our community and a threat to everyone who calls Sonoma County home. We believe its structures and ripple effects are threats to our community well-being and our democracy. We are unafraid. We are unafraid and unapologetic about exposing the oppression of racism. As Los Cien is committed to illuminating these issues and leaning into these hard conversations, we invite you and we welcome individuals and organizations that wish to join us to ensure and amplify racial justice progress and change in our community. Los Cien's vision, and you can see this on our website, is a vision of orgullo, pride, and equity for the Latinx community in Sonoma County. Since 2010, since the back room at Mary's Pizza, we have worked towards this vision in order to advance belonging and trust and equity for and with our whole community by engaging in sometimes hard conversations. Our intentions are always to facilitate honest dialogue and elevate understanding that what affects the Latinx community here in Sonoma County affects everyone who calls this majestic, beautiful space home. And now I'm going to turn our program over to Nico.
Thank you, Lisa. Hola, friends, bienvenidos. So happy to be here. Who's ready to talk about race Thursday at 7 p.m.? I sure am. Friends, I want to invite our amazing panelists here. You can take yourself off mute. This is casual. I have basketball shorts on and a button up. Okay, I am in business casual. I am, friends, Nico Kimson. He, him are my pronouns. I am a queer Latinx performer, producer, arts and equity consultant that loves chubby dogs and a fierce musical. My why is to uplift the human spirit. So that is what we will be doing here today. And we thank you for joining us. I get the incredible privilege of introducing our generous panelists and family. And I want to encourage you to introduce yourself in the way that you want to today on a Thursday at 7 p.m. Bring your full self, do something weird, bring your full human self, work self. And I'm going to pass it over to one of my idols and friends, Dr. Profesora Daniela Dominguez.
Hi, gracias, amigo. Thank you so much. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much for being here. Bienvenidos, bienvenides a todos. Betsy, hermana, thank you so much for translating. I am Dani Dominguez. My pronouns are she, her, hers, ella, and I identify as non-Black, cisgender, Latina. I do love some papitas con salsita, you know, the buffalo sauce. Sometimes I put in Tabasco sauce.
That's it.
You know, and I do enjoy eating those papitas with a nice banda song. Lately, and I've been listening to a lot of banda, so that's the way I spend my weekends. And check, I'll pass it on if that's okay, Angie.
Oh, hello, everybody. Angie Dillon Shore. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a cisgender, white, late bloomer, lesbian. Good luck with translating that, Betsy. I don't know if the late bloomer comes out in the wash there. But yeah, I came out in my late 30s after 10 years of kind of hiding in plain sight, raising a son. But now, you know, just fully myself here in Sonoma County. I've been here for about 18 years. I have the great honor of leading First Five Sonoma County. I'm so grateful to have an incredible team there, and very lucky to have a board of commissioners that really believe strongly in centering racial equity in our work, which has a lot to do with why I have the privilege and freedom of being here tonight and speaking very directly to the subject. And just so honored to be here with you all tonight. And thank you for inviting me to this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Pass it over to Oscar.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Oscar Pardo. I am a local attorney here with the Office of Perry Johnson, Anderson, Miller, and Moskowitz. I have been a founding member of Los Cien. I identify as he, him. My apologies for looking like Queen for Bohemian Rhapsody tonight, but that's the best lighting I can do. I will do my best to get past you guys thinking that throughout the course of the program. But thank you very much for joining us. And I'll pass it over again to Lisa because she is also one of our panelists tonight.
Yeah, so Lisa Carreño again. I'm married for a really long time with my wife, Lorene. We have 3 sons, 9 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandson, Asa, who lives just a couple doors down. I do this for them. Proud to do it.
But let's do it, fam. Let's get in. And I love, thank you for sharing yourself personally, professionally, because we're bringing all of that mess to this table in this conversation. As I said last time, this is a big family dinner table that we're all sitting at, and we're all ready to dive into this conversation. I would just like to preface and frame that we are perfectly imperfect people that are in process, and we are showing up today in community with one another to be an example of how conversations around race might be explored through joy, fear, difficulty, love, all the complexities that live within us. So if we down to clown, let's jump. First, I want to start with my Los Cien group, Lisa, Oscar. Why are we here? Why Los Cien? Why standing up for racial equity? What does that mean for Los Cien?
Do you want me to start, Oscar?
You're the most sage of the bunch, so yes.
So everybody out there, I think you know our good friend, Hermano Herman Hernandez, who started convening us literally in the back room at Mary's Pizza Shack in downtown Santa Rosa, because Herman and friends with whom he began meeting 12 and a half years ago, saw that in the policies and in the resource allocations and the decisions being made, that there was, too little understanding, too little investment in particularly the Latino community. And when he would show up to meetings, it was always the same small group of Latinos, same people being asked over and over again for their opinions about the needs of the Latino community, as if all of us are, as if we're a monolith. And that if you ask me a question about what the needs are of the Latino community in Sonoma County, I'm somehow going to be able to tell you and reflect, the needs of the whole community. I'm not even from Sonoma County. I am Cuban, Italian, Spanish, Siboney. I can't speak for the whole community. I am just me. But way back then, there wasn't really that understanding. And so we began to meet, began to talk, and little by little, the non-Latino community started asking, can we come to those conversations? We want to be in on those conversations. We want to understand what your experience is and where you're coming from. And we want to collaborate and we want to be allies with you. So the genesis of Los Cien was, as Herman likes to say, we didn't want to be on the menu. We wanted to be at the table. And so over 12 and a half years, we've had a lot of hard conversations, and little by little, more and more, we're at the table informing decisions. And there's a long road to go. we were a new organization then, and then we became a 501c3. And it was at that time in 2015 that we started having serious conversations about being an inclusive organization, an intentionally inclusive organization. So we've been around before we started talking about inclusion. And now over the last few years, it's about racism and diversity.
And what I heard you say, right, is that race is part of that origin story of Los Cien. You can't talk about Los Cien without talking about race.
Right.
So it's really, it's part of the story. And so now bringing it to the forefront in these conversations. And, I want to pivot over to why, racism, race, right? And then race in our community, racism in our community. Oscar, can you talk a little bit about why it's important to have Los Cien facilitating conversations about race in our community?
Sure. So, as Lisa was mentioning, one of the principles that Los Cien has always espoused is the ability to convene at a table. And at first, we were just happy to people were coming and showing up to the table. And then we thought, I think you brought up the analogy. This is like a Thanksgiving dinner table. And at some point, you need to have difficult conversations. And over the years, we have grown to an extent that we started to recognize that we have to have these difficult conversations. It's not enough that you show up, but we have to have these conversations in order to get past some of those issues that have put a gap stop on the change that we're trying to see. And so, for example, race. We started talking about equity, especially more so during the pandemic, when we were seeing all the inequities that were coming around to various communities due to the disparities in healthcare delivery. And then we had the woefully unfortunate episode, social episode with George Floyd. And we started to see that there was this renewed awareness by some to address or at least discuss these issues. And when we're trying to figure out what is important for making that change, that critical point that we need to discuss, initially we started thinking about equity and equality, but the precursors, sort of the prerequisites to thinking about equity and equality is talking about race. This country has had a very long history with race, and most often than not, it's something that you really don't talk about. I mean, I know we gave the analogy of the dinner table, but I don't think I ever remember having a conversation in my family where I talked about race. But that's a conversation that needs to happen if you want to talk about equity and equality. You cannot escape that discussion. So as we were thinking about what happened with Los Cien at the State of the Latino Address, which was a big conversation about equity and redistribution of resources, I am on the program committee, and collectively we thought we need to have these discussions, as hard as they are. We need to have them and have them in a place where you can say something and maybe it's a mistake, or maybe it's no, nothing like that. It's more like you just got to have them. Otherwise, if you just kind of skirt around it, there's this fear that you have that doesn't let you get to the root cause. And so we said, look, well, we're here today to start that conversation and see where it takes us.
And Oscar, I love what you say about the dinner table, right? I think the best thing about my family is that everybody's welcome, right? La familia is familia, right? You really got to try hard to get yourself kicked out of La Familia, okay? And that's what I love, is that we're at this messy dinner table, and like Theo might say something, Tia, what'd you say? But you're still here, and we're still eating together, and we're learning and growing together, right? And there's love in that. I'd like to position it to Angie now. Angie, why are these conversations around, we've heard from Los Cien's perspective, right, of why to have these conversations. Why for you, personally and professionally, why have these conversations?
Yeah, I think advancing racial equity, right, moving forward with this topic beyond the superficial, I feel very personally, morally obligated to stand up, right? Like, I don't think we can move forward if white people aren't willing to not only be allies, but to actually commit to action and to being an accomplice. But going against the status quo, right, for anything is just inherently scary. There is risk inherent on that, and it's very different, looks different for every individual. I mean, social and professional relationships in Sonoma County, especially among community leaders, I think, or at least just in my experience, are often very intertwined. Loyalties are super complex, and they're bound up with our identity of ourselves as like doing good things for our community. But then when you start layering in the economic power, right, it gets super complicated. We don't want to offend donors. We don't want to offend our funders, the supporters of the work that many of us do, right? Or the success of our work feels dependent on being very, not straying too far from the status quo. So I think speaking directly about racism and white supremacy, frankly, especially if you're going to call it out as a driver of how decisions are made or how power and wealth are distributed, right? Like with that state of, the conversations that you guys had, that there was some concerns around. Being direct about that really does create legit potential for individuals to lose positional power, to lose their livelihood, to be ostracized, right? So it's real.
Yeah,
But I
thank
don't
you.
think but I don't put that out there saying that's the reason why we should hesitate. I actually do think there's a path forward, but we have to acknowledge that first, right? And that it's very complex, and have compassion for everyone and ourselves too.
Angie, you just said the hot button word of the night, white supremacy. Angie, you brought it up, not me. You brought it up, Angie. Thank you. We're gonna get back to that, but I want to pass it over to Danny over here. Danny, why have these conversations? Why personally? Why professionally? And why in our community? Tell me on that why.
Oof, we have to. We totally have to. So it makes me think about what Lisa was talking about equity as a verb. And I also feel like sometimes indifference is a verb, right? So one of the things that I think about is how can I be a good ancestor today? How can I be a good ancestor for my students, for my niece, for my nephew, for my community? How can I show up and be in pursuit of justice and liberation? So when we were talking about your why, which is to uplift human spirits, my why is to strive and pursue a world that I truly in my heart believe is possible. So I really want to exercise my hope muscles. And I'm a big fan of Mariam Kaba, who talks about hope as a discipline. So every morning I exercise hope muscles. I truly radically imagine a new world where all of us are free and all of us are experiencing cross-racial solidarity and radical love. So I don't think that we would be doing this if we didn't believe that that was possible. And I understand the fear, right? Like I heard Angie talk about fear and I'm like, yeah, we got to name it. And speaking of that dinner table, I think when I think about family, I would probably go to family members who I know would tell me the truth. And so the reason why I like this conversation is that we are starting to name realities. And there is a reality that we often don't talk about, which is white supremacy. The words white supremacy, we're naming them. They're out here. So what is white supremacy? And I think that what happens is that we often don't understand what it means. And then languaging gets complicated. And then conversations start getting complex. And so I think that we need to define that as well in terms of these conversations. And so we can definitely go into that, but I don't want to take too much space. So I'll send it back.
Listen, Linda, listen. We here now, okay? Wait, I'm going to bring it back to you. You said hope muscles, okay? So listen, you need to go to Hope Gym to get some hope muscles. So we're at the gym right now, and one of the exercises is naming these things that stand in our way. And from what you said, that would take our community towards a more liberated community for all, right? And I want to stay on this as we name things like white supremacy, as we name things like fear that we have in these conversations, that this is not just a thing that frees Los Cien, frees the Latinx community. This is having these conversations around these dinner tables is freedom for all of us, right? And I want to speak to that a little bit more. And Danny, I know when you say like good ancestor, right? What does that mean for you? Being a good ancestor, but be like, how can we all do that with our slice?
So I go back to this idea of equity as a verb. And I think about that. We are so centered around doing in our culture instead of being. And so if I allow myself to be, if I allow myself to embody the just and liberated world that I long for today, in this moment, if I show up for my community, what would that look like? So that's the dialogue that's happening in my mind. So the way Danny structures it in her mind is, I need to build my awareness, I need to build my knowledge, and I need to polish my skills. And a part of that awareness is to understand that when I talk about white supremacy, it's not about individual people per se, but we're talking about a social, cultural, economic, and political system of domination that privileges, centralizes, and elevates white people as a group. Look, white people are my siblings. And I realize that we have to be in this together to co-create this new reality, this new world. And a part of that first step is for all of us to have that understanding, to understand that white supremacy is not about one person, but it's about a structure.
Yeah, and I love that. And I love the idea of sitting down and having the conversation at the table is what you said, it's awareness, right? Then it's knowledge, then it's skills, then it's action, right? And so we're building that here all together with, you know, our white fam here too, right? I want to bring it up. So just so backstory, I'm going to air the dirty laundry. We've been having 3 Zooms with my Los Cien family here, and we had conversation after conversation. What is this panel going to be about? How do we talk about this in this way, right? And it was messy and it was beautiful, and there was a bunch of fear. So we're just going to name fear. Fear when it comes to talking about conversations about race. For me, how it shows up, my chest gets a little tight, my palms get a little sweaty, sweatier than they normally are. And I think, who's going to be watching this, right? I see the participant thing. I know my colleagues are on. Am I going to slip up? Am I going to say the right thing? Am I going to be canceled? Am I going to cancel them? Are they going to cancel me? Right? Like, we all have fear. And I don't care, you know, the wokeiest of the woke, but we are all here learning together, right? And I think that's the thing, is fear can be a unifying, beautiful thing that we're all learning together. This is our growth mindset, right? So I want to ask that to this collective. What do you fear when it comes to having conversations around race? Lisa, Lisa, I heard the I'm coming to you.
Yeah. So, you know, I was listening to all of you, remembering being a kid growing up in Tampa, and like wanting to have these conversations in my family, trying to have these conversations in my family, but you know, it was a struggle there too. And in the back of my mind, I started hearing the words of the admonitions of some of my elders. Hi, Lisa, but why do you want to talk about things like that? You know, and I didn't know that talking about things like racism was not okay. And so I felt ashamed. And so I would feel afraid of asking questions. I would feel afraid of lifting my voice, because I found myself feeling afraid that I was saying the wrong thing, asking the wrong question, doing the wrong thing. I felt exposed for doing it wrong, maybe for not seeing the world the way that they thought I should. And so really feeling different. So, you know, I just, you know, I know we're talking about fear, but I had not thought about this until I heard our conversation unfolding tonight. You know, there's also this shame that I'm not doing it right.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Shame, right? And what I heard you say earlier, right? This imposter syndrome. Who am I?
right.
I don't have the vocab. I don't have the language.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't have the
I
skill.
heard those words. Who do you think you are?
That's right. I hear that every day in my head. You talk about that. Why you? I want to. Oh, Oscar, go for it. Go for it. I see that finger. Go for it. You
Yeah,
got something to say.
I want to continue the thought that Lisa put out there about this fear, and then we've been talking about here, because I think uh, that is a huge speed bump in our discussions here, and to the extent that what is fear? I think for the most part, it's fear of the unknown, and the unknown of the other side, and oftentimes the unknown within yourself. Like, what am I so scared of? What am I going to find out about myself, or where I come from, or what I'm doing that's gonna sort of color me in a certain way? Pardon the pun, but I mean that's what it is. But I would challenge anyone who's having that type of fear to actually go in and start knowing where you're coming from, because maybe at that point you'll start to understand why other people are looking at you in a certain way, or why you may feel this fear that you're having. Uh, because if you don't, then it's that we talked about it in our prior discussions. It's this elephant in the room. We know it's there, but no one wants to say anything about that. And part of the conversation, the impetus for part of this discussion is we know it's there. Let's talk about it, right?
And Oscar, oh, I'm sweating. You just took me to church. Let me tell you, when you said, what am I going to find out about myself?
Right.
I see that pop up when we say the word white supremacy. And everyone, including myself, it asks, if I ask that question, if I dig deep, if I get curious as opposed to defensive, if I lean in, what am I going to find out about myself? How have I been participating and contributing to that system, right? And so a defense mechanism is to not talk about it, right? I don't want to find out how I've been a part of that. This is great. Angie, I want to pass it over to you, my friend. You are, I just want to say, what am I going to find out about myself? And in these conversations, what fear has come up in that exploration?
I would say definitely shame, I think, is a common kind of thread underneath that fear for me. So I related to that, what you said, Oscar. That's definitely, I think, shame of what is my connection to these oppressive systems. But I think the work is something that could really, I think, help to move a lot of us forward that struggle with this shame and fear, is learning how to separate, how to critique and kind of pull apart white supremacist systems, right? Oppressive systems, without confusing them with individual people, including ourselves as individual human beings. Because the people part has nothing to do with, it's not about identifying racists and bad actors, right? Whether that's me or anybody else. It's about redefining boundaries, right? Between all of us, between groups, creating community that's based on inclusivity, right? Increasing our sense of belonging and others' sense of belonging, including those in our circle of love and compassion that you might not know, you might not be familiar with their language or their culture, examining your assumptions about them and then building bridges, right? Like one of the really most inspiring thinkers and writers, teachers on social justice for me has been Bell Hooks, right, who passed away fairly recently. And she would talk about radical love and belonging like that in the same sentence, literally in the same sentence that she would talk about the impacts of the imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, right? And how that denies people of color lives of well-being. But that part was always about the systems, not people. But the process does go hand in hand. But I think by separating those things, one is somewhat of a cognitive, cerebral, intellectual kind of exercise, and the other is one of the heart,
Mhm.
right? and how we either other people or invite them into our circle.
You know, and Angie, that's a moment for me where I'm like, I gotta go back to the hope gym to get this hope muscle, right? Is to have this conversation to separate people and systems, right?
Hard.
Because we can love people, but we love people that's operating within an oppressive system, right? And we operate within that system daily. And so it's the unlearning and relearning, right? And getting into that hope mindset, that hope muscle. So you brought up radical love, right? As a tactic to go around this obstacle that is fear. I want to bring it over to Profesora to talk about what is another tactic that you use to kind of go beyond the obstacle of fear to have these conversations. What's a tool you use?
So first of all, I think it's just understanding that fear is evolutionary. It is an adaptive response to a perceived threat. So when I experience that fear, it's like, okay, well, you know, your body is trying to tell you something. Your heart, your spirit is trying to tell you something. And then the second thing is to try to think about this perceived threat. What is that about? Because feeling uncomfortable is not necessarily the same thing as feeling unsafe, and vice versa. And so for me, that going back to the gym is about moving myself into the stretch zone. And we call that, you know, and Cindy Berrios and I talk about it, about this growing nervous excitement of moving into spaces that we might not necessarily understand and know. And Paulo Freire talks about it as concientización, that emotional cognitive process of learning more about the truth behind our own oppression. So the work starts with us. And so for me, it is about keeping it super real and honest and asking myself, Danny, how have you perpetuated and been complicit in white supremacy? Because we've all been conditioned by white supremacy. And white supremacy harms every single one of us. I've written articles about Latinos, Latinx communities, without thinking about my Black Latinx siblings, my Afro-Latino siblings. That's anti-Blackness. So I have to name it and I have to say, all right, Danny, what is that about? And then not only, Danny, you've perpetuated and been complicit in your actions and in, you know, amplifying and reinforcing the system. And what are you going to do about it? How are you going to mend? How are you going to tap into transformative justice to make sure that, you know, you can take action in the direction of liberation, which is your why? So I think it's about alignment with your values. It's constantly exercising in an ongoing, sustainable way, doing it over and over again. And Ibram X. Kendi, by the way, is coming to Hannah. Shout out to Hannah. And he talks about that, right? He talks about how, you know, to be a racist or an anti-racist is not who you are, but what you're doing in a particular moment. So Danny can be giving presentations on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging across the county, and then say something that is oppressive. So it's like keeping it super real with ourselves and thinking about how are we also standing on the shoulders of giants. I think about my queer elders who I wouldn't be able to get married today had it not been for elders who fought for same-sex marriage. So what about now? How are we going to create a new society that's more equitable for the generations to come? And it's all about, again, about solidarity.
And I love what you say, Danny, too. It's about, you know, going back to that gym, building up that muscle, but learning it on oppressive systems and carrying that over to intersectional ones, right? For queerness, for trans folk, for, you know, learning it, anti-oppressive structures and learning how you operate within it, naming it, building awareness, knowledge, dismantling that, but that's, you know, across multiple different oppressive systems. Oscar, you had something you want to chime in there.
Yeah, so as we were discussing here, and for the audience's sake, I want to just to let them know that we've had these, this group here has had these discussions in the last month or so, very intense and evolving discussions. And at least one of the things that I took away from it, as we're talking about defining terms, the term white supremacy, I'm fine with that term to the extent that I'm not hoping people aren't walking away from that term thinking about these heavy connotations that the term typically takes, which is, you know, seeing people around of white skin walking around with a cap or a white hood or something. That's not what I believe we're talking about here. We're talking about systematic issues. You know, things that we have seen over the course of the history of this country. Is we all come to realize that when we're talking about race, we're not talking of a biological construct. We're not talking about my biology is different than your biology or your genetics. We're talking about a system here in America that was built upon the distinction of race for the purposes of power and separation and oppression as a result of it. That's sort of the structure of white supremacy that we're talking about, or at least that I'm thinking about when I look at this. I don't go walking around, at least for me personally, looking at my white brethren thinking you guys are all wearing this cap. No, there's people that are doing the good work, right? And those are the people that have actually done that soul searching that we were talking about earlier, right? So that concept, that term that I'm looking at it, I guess what I'm trying to say here at the end is that there's these, because we really haven't had these types of discussions collectively, whether in a nation or at least in Sonoma County, there's these loaded terms that come out that people sometimes get fearful, going back to the fear, about using. Like, am I saying that right? Am I standing up for this in the right way? Am I thinking about something in the right way? And it's all about giving context to those terms. If your initiative is to learn about this stuff.
Yeah. And Oscar, I love what you said, and you're keeping it kind of across the country, but I want to bring it home to Sonoma County, right? And we just had the release of the portrait of Sonoma County last night. And a huge thing, undeniable, through fact, through research, science data, that race is a health issue in Sonoma County, right? So when we talk about, racism across the country, right? This connotation, it's here, it is alive, it is well, and it is hurting some of our communities, and arguably it's hurting all of our communities, right? And I think that's, and I want to bring it locally, and I want to bring it back to, super personal examples too of, Lisa, you fancy, okay? You fancy, you high up there. And when I think about like you walking into a boardroom, right? You walking into meetings, and what is the fear you feel? And then how do you overcome that fear to have these conversations about race, right? We've been noodling these past couple of Zoom days together, but for you, I mean, you're a fancy person to me, okay? So, but how do you walk in? And I mean, I'm sure you still have fear, right? And then what is the thing that allows you to overcome that fear?
Yeah, we've been talking about the hope muscle. And I think what just occurred to me, because I know we want to start offering our participants in the program tonight ideas for how to build their ally muscles and become accomplices with us in the work that we're doing. And there's this other muscle that I think I have, and I think maybe my hope muscle needs more of a workout, but I do have this curiosity muscle. And I do find myself asking questions like, well, why is that happening? For example, with the portrait of Sonoma County, I was bowled over last night looking at the slide that shows us that the Human Development Index for our Black brothers and sisters has gone down almost a full percentage point since the 2014 report was released. And I'm curious about why that's true. I'm really curious about why over these last 8 years, the life expectancy of our Indigenous brothers and sisters has gone down over 8 years. What is up with that? Why is that happening? I want to understand why. And so the curiosity muscle in me is maybe, I mean, for good or bad, maybe more fearless. And that intellectual curiosity that I know comes from here wants to know why that's happening and wants to be a part of figuring out what do we need to do to the system to reverse this course, because that's not okay with me.
Yeah. Friends, I do want to say we have a couple people bringing us in some questions here in the chat. I would encourage you to put your questions into the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. We're going to come up to our Q&A moment here. I would encourage you to do that because we have this incredible panel here that is hungry to answer some questions and dive deeper into this. Lisa, what I love what you say, and I feel that too, is that there is this kind of curiosity, but then also it speaks from my heart in this rage, and I'm upset. Why is that? Why, when I see those numbers, it strikes a pain in my heart, right? And it moves me to curiosity. It moves me, you know, to want to move to action, right? And I think this is a way we start to move to that, is we start to bring our community into conversation and say, these are our Black brothers and sisters that we love, our Black fam, and we want to bring them in, right? And we want to be solution partners, right? And how can we build community around that, as opposed to letting this conversation distance us from one another? So I see that. I'm going to transition here to a little bit of the questions as they're coming in, because we have these brilliant brains on here. I have an incredible question from Zoom saying, how do white Hispanics, Latinos fit into this?
Oh, I've got a lot to say about that.
Well, and I think it speaks to the larger, you know, question of diversity. When we say diversity, it is Dropbox files upon Dropbox files, right? But Lisa, you want to take that one? You want to?
I just want to say, I think that we have a lot to answer. Those of us, I mean, I don't know all of what my ancestry is. I do know that my grandfather, my great grandfather were Siboney, were Taino, Siboney from Cuba. And I know colorism within the Latino community is real. I don't want to begin to tell you some of the things that I've heard, some of the incredibly racist things that I've heard from my own family. And that has informed me for a long time. I just knew that what they were saying and the way they behaved wasn't right, wasn't
yeah.
You know. And so, you know, we have a lot to answer for with our own racism and our own colorism. And
Lisa, can I pause you there? And I'm going to pass it over to Danny here, and I'm hoping, Danny, you can hook me up with a kind of a clinical definition of colorism and expand that a little bit more.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Isabel Wilkerson does a beautiful job of talking about the racial caste system. So, you know, she talks about race as kind of like a flashcard. So when people see me, right, they see something. I can guess probably it's brown skin. When we're talking about white Latinos, right now folks are having the conversation around being really intentional about underlining the privileges and advantages that come with being white, even if you are still a white Latino. Why? Because, you know, when people see you, when they see that flashcard, that white skin, that carries with it a lot of advantages. And so I think one of the things that we need to be really thoughtful around within the Latinx community is that anti-Blackness that exists, the anti-indigeneity that exists within our communities, how cruel we can be with our indigenous siblings, and understanding that we learn how to perpetrate from the perpetrator. So we learn how to oppress from oppression, from oppressive forces. And so this work applies to every single one of us. The anti-indigeneity that exists in my family, it's terrible. And so we talk also in my classes about how do we come to terms with the fact that a lot of us as Latinos, the oppressor and the oppressed coexist within us, right? So I have white Latinx family members, and I also have indigenous Latinx family members. And so I'm having to grapple and contend with all of that. And so I just want to invite people to ask themselves these difficult questions and think about how do we start disrupting and dismantling these systems of oppression? And there are different entry points. We always say there are different entry points. And so what is the tool that you can pick up for justice? If you were to pick up a tool for justice today, what would it be? And there's no cookie cutter way of looking at this. There's not, a 1 to 10 list, and then we're going to wrap it nicely in a little bow. It is, what are you good at? The work starts with you. Today, what kind of conversation are you going to have in your family? What is that kitchen table conversation going to look like?
And all of us here, working professionals within Sonoma County, how will we walk into our Zoom rooms, our offices differently, right? How does the personal then inform the professional? Because we all have to move together in order to move what that looks like, justice here, racial justice here in Sonoma County. It makes me think, Danny, when you're talking about colorism, right, and that exists, and the oppressor and the oppressed exist within us, right? It goes back to what Lisa was saying originally, and I feel it so much that personally, I'm sure we've all felt it here, of being the spokesperson for a community. It's like that, like, tell me what the Latinos have to say, Los Cien. We're not all of them. Thank you very much for asking. You know what I mean? And it's like, there's layers upon layers, and even then within ourselves, right? The layers of colorism, the layers of the complexity that comes with these conversations around race and identity. I want to ask another question here that's beautifully put within our thing, is what besides education can help us use asset-based language in conversations and stop the professional and personal microaggressions towards our BIPOC community? Now, in order to answer this question, I wanna break apart one thing for us, and Angie, maybe you can help us out here, but microaggressions. Can you just give us a short snippet on your understanding of microaggressions?
Sure, and it's I'm noticing a comment in the chat right around that, giving context to white supremacy isn't all about Nazis and the Klan, right? So it's similar. Like microaggression is not the Zoom bomber, using the N-word and really hurting the people of color on the call. That's racism for sure, but a microaggression is something that just may fly by 90% of the people in the room. It's a comment, it's a tone of voice, it's something that diminishes the humanity and the actual position, power, intelligence, whatever it is about the person, and based on probably an unconscious assumption about who that person is and their lesser than status.
Yeah. Oh, Oscar, go for it.
Yeah, Angie, thank you so much for that definition, because I was going to give you an example here from personal experience.
Yeah.
When I first came here to the county, I'm an attorney. When I first came here to the county, I was sent to do a court appearance in Mendocino County. And every courthouse pretty much has these two entryways into the courthouse, one for the general public and one for the attorneys to kind of get through and handle your business. I went through the attorney's side, and I was stopped, and I was asked for my bar card, which is not a big deal, so long as you're asking everyone for their bar card. But as I was there searching through my briefcase for my bar card, 5 or 6 white gentlemen walked through. No one asked them anything. And so by the time I got my bar card, I had noticed this, and I asked the bailiff that was there at the door, how come they went through? Oh, well, I know them all. They're here all the time. Okay. I go up to the courthouse, to the room that I was going to appear in, and I'm sitting down before they open up the courthouse. And the attorney on the other side, who I've never met, was sitting there, and he kind of comes up to me and he says, "Are you Oscar?" I said, "Yes." He goes, "Oh my God, I'm so glad to hear that you're here, because I've never been here." He was one of those people who walked through. I felt that for me was a microaggression, because I felt like everyone else who was white got through, no questions asked, and I was stopped. And the reason that I was given for that was this sort of presupposed reason that, well, I know them. Well, you don't, because this attorney had never been there. Yeah. And those are the little things that you see on may experience, and you're thinking about, what was that? Mm-hmm. Well, that's what a microaggression is. It's that, what was that moment? Like, what was that all about? That's part of it.
And I think, and thank you, Oscar. That is, and thank you for sharing that so bravely, your personal experience with that. And the question to bring it back is about, what besides education, what can we use in conversations to stop that, to stop professional and personal microaggressions towards our BIPOC community, right? What is that when we talk about going to the Hope Gym? What are those things that we've used?
I feel like the question, the person who's giving us that question is asking us, what are the different ways that we can be allies in that moment, or that we can be upstanders in that moment? So when that happens to somebody that, we see something like that, one thing that I can do is like, as the other attorney down the hall, say, Oscar, I saw that was totally wrong. And, I'm gonna talk to that guy, or I know his supervisor. I'm gonna say I saw this happen, and that's not okay. I mean, if they're gonna check everybody's bar card, sure, but if they're not, if they're gonna call out you because you look different from the others, that's not okay. I mean, that's one way. I think another way is by directly confronting the person who's doing that, but we need to develop, I think, a lot of muscles and a lot of confidence and a lot of core grounding before we do something like that. And I think sometimes what people struggle with is they think, in order for me to be a good ally, that's what I have to do. No, that's not what you have to do. I mean, notice it. That's notice it. I saw that. Think about it. And think about what you might do different when you see it again, or how you might connect with that person who was injured by that. Befriend them, give them a signal that you're in this with them. You saw that and that hurt you too.
Angie, have you been in a moment that you've seen something like that happen? And either you can give us a moment where you have acted on it, or a moment where you didn't, and how that made you feel.
I mean, constantly, right? You see it all the time in everyday interaction. Let's see, I can't think of a really good example, but I think just in the workplace, as a leader of the organization, right? We're a relatively small organization. One thing that I've really tried to do is make it very safe and expected and supported to call each other out on microaggressions, to model that, to but at the same time developing a closeness and a safety as just a team. We're only 10 people.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important in the workplace in particular. It's probably where you see it. Like Oscar's example was a professional situation. I think you see that a lot, because that's when there are really people treat people differently based on a very white dominant culture lens of what is competence and what is professional behavior and things like that.
So Angie and Oscar, maybe hopefully this leads to your thing here, but what I heard you say, right, is making these agreements to one another, right, that when these moments happen. And the next question is, what commitment can we make as a community to hold each other accountable for this work, right? It's the other thing of awareness and action, but it's accountability, that when something like this happens, when that happens to Oscar, we notice it. We've made a commitment to ourselves, right? Los Cien has made a commitment, and they verbally said, we will be unafraid and unapologetic about standing up to racial inequity, right? And so I want to spin ourselves into, like, what commitment can we make as a community to hold each other accountable for this work? And Oscar, I don't know if that leads to your question, but feel free to.
It does in a way. So how I would answer that question is, the accountability starts with getting to know other members of the community who are not what you would consider your community. Sort of going across the aisle, breaking bread with other people who you normally haven't done that with. Because that's the only way that I can show you meaning somebody else, that I got your back, or at the very minimum that I understand what just happened to you, right? One thing is to is to just stand up for it for that temporal moment that it happened in, and the other one is to how do I make that more lasting? How do I reach out to other community members and other communities so that when something happens to them, I understand it. It's easier for me to understand, and it's easier for me to say, I'm here for you.
Bring it on home. Anybody else? We
Danny,
have
you're very quiet.
Danny. I know you, Danny.
Yeah, I mean, look, I work full-time in Sonoma County. This is where my students are. This is where I teach. This is where, we're training our youth organizers. I'm deeply committed to this community. And I think it's also really painful to see, as Cornel West would say, how sometimes we sanitize and deodorize these conversations. And so we talk about racial equity and health disparities and social determinants of health. And we do it in such a diplomatic way with so much psychobabble, and we just gotta be bold, man. Like, we just really have to be honest and say, this is just truly dehumanizing.
Yeah.
So I think the road is, as Ibram X. Kendi would say again, I know I'm quoting him a lot, but we just got to honor the times when we're being anti-racist, honor that, because we are modeling to this next generation and to each other how to be in right relationship with ourselves, to each other, and to the land, but also confess the times when we are being racist. And we don't want to do that, y'all. Like, that's the thing. We seriously have to have a come to, I would say, Baby J moment, right? Of what do we got to do differently? Like, let's be bold.
Right.
We got to have political will. We have to be sacrificial. White people, my white siblings, y'all got to hold the line, because the disproportionate pain that our Black, Indigenous siblings and other people of color are experiencing. And I'm saying this with so much privilege, right? Like, I have a roof over my head. I have a job. I have the academic freedom to say all of this, but we have to hold the line, because there are people who are at this moment right now suffering. I provide therapy to clients whose hands are like, all, there are cuts and there's so much inflammation. And like, how do we, when we started this conversation today, I said, remember, we're doing this for community. How do we honor those who are on the margins of society and keep it real? Like, let's move beyond the political and the diplomatic and just call it what it is.
So you want a real, Profesora? I got a real question for you and this collective. And then we're going to use this as our last question, and then I'll transition to Oscar and bring it back to Los Cien and what offerings we have for communities to still continue these conversations. This is a real question, right? I'm curious about what considerations were given to inviting Black identified panelists to this program. Can we truly have honest conversations about racism and anti-Blackness if we're not centering those that are impacted by it? What is Los Cien's commitment to addressing anti-Blackness in the Latine community moving forward? Let's get real, y'all.
So I so appreciate the question. I read that in the chat as well, and I'm grateful that that the participant put that question there. This is Los Cien's first open out conversation about equity building and racism, and it's imperfect. It's a starting place. It's not an ending place. This panel, Nico has referenced, there have been several planning meetings that have led to tonight's conversation. This isn't what we originally thought we were going to be doing or how we thought we were going to be doing it. This is our starting point, and it's imperfect, with all humility and with respect. We don't have everybody at the table. We're just getting started with this conversation, and God willing, I hope we will have a lot more conversations like this, and that they will be as vulnerable and honest and as imperfect as this one has been. You know, I really feel you, and I hope that you like what you've seen so far and what you've heard so far, and that we can make a commitment to keep the conversation going, to invite others to this table who are not here yet, because we want to keep the conversation going. The more we do it, the more we learn, the more we change.
Yeah, and I think what, you know, going back to the last question, Lisa, is this word of accountability.
Yeah.
Right, that we invite the community, the Los Cien community, Sonoma County, to hold Los Cien, each other, accountable, right, to addressing these questions of anti-Blackness within our community, right? We invite you to that. And I think in this stretch mindset, in this hope gym, that we invite you to the gym with us to learn that, right? And sometimes we need people to ask those questions to say, you're talking about anti-Blackness, why aren't Black identifying folks there, right? And that's what we need, and it sharpens us. And so I guess, you know, for Los Cien, I think it's really important for you, right, to hear, you know, how do y'all take that from the community and move forward and say, this is a voice from the community. We want to respond to this. We've been held accountable. How do we respond? Oscar, go for it.
Yes, and to add to what you said, Nico, and what Lisa put out there, from the Los Cien perspective, as Lisa mentioned, I'm one of the founding members along with her. And we have been doing this work for at least 10 years now. And we need new thoughts and new blood. And we need people to come in and share their experiences, just like they're doing right here, and then continue to drive the work with us. So one of the parts, at least from the program committee perspective that I sit on, is if you have questions, topics, issues that you want to address in this type of a forum, come to me. I'm more than happy to listen to you. Believe me, I spend a lot of time talking to people because we don't want to put programs out there that don't leave you thinking about what we said at some bit when you leave. So these are some of the questions that I'm gonna sign off here, and I'm gonna think, gosh, I should have done that, or we should have done this. And I invite you to come and do this work with us, because we're all trying to figure it out. As Lisa said, we're all imperfect, but that doesn't mean that we have to, that shouldn't be an excuse to stop.
No.
Gotta keep going, right? So come on over, let's talk. I'd be happy, break bread, have a coffee, have like I said, a pint of beer, and sit down and talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, Nico, just a couple of quick things for Paul, who asked the question about Latinx and BIPOC people disproportionately affected by climate change. I just want to say that is a subject that that Los Cien needs to take on. But know that what we have seen over the last 4 years is that the Latinx and BIPOC communities of Sonoma County have been very adversely affected by the fire emergencies and by the flooding that we've experienced here in this community. And for Christy Lopez, we can take your question about the rental program to the people who are making the policies that are setting up rental assistance and say, you know, what can we do about this qualification, which is going to lock so many people out of support? Asking those questions is helping us do what Los Cien needs to do, and what we as individuals in the community who want to lean into these hard conversations are also volunteering to do.